Today at the National Press Club, BlueScope Managing Director and CEO Mark Vassella. He'll discuss how gas prices are hurting manufacturing, jobs and the energy transition in Australia, as well as how this can be turned around. Mark Vassella with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac address. I'm Tom Connell, the club's president and an anchor at Sky News. Our guest today, Mark Vassella, BlueScope Managing Director and CEO. His address: Australian gas prices are costing us our manufacturing, jobs, energy transition and a future made in Australia. There are obviously a lot of different views on gas, but most seem to agree it belongs in the basket effectively of that old Irish joke about the best way to Dublin. You wouldn't start from here. Mark joined the company following BlueScope's 2007 acquisition of Morgan Steel Distribution. He's gone to the US and headed back to these shores during his time with the company, and he's been a director since January 2018. For those of you watching at home, you can join the conversation at X, where our handle is @PressClubAust, or you can use the hashtag NPC. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mark Vassella.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you, everybody. Thank you to the National Press Club and Westpac as well. It's lovely to be here. So good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present to you today. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Ngunnawal people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So before I explain what I think's wrong with our public energy policy and propose options on how to fix it, let me tell you a real-life story, a cautionary tale of what happens if countries don't get their energy policy right. Earlier this year in April, one of BlueScope's raw materials team from Port Kembla Steelworks explained the following circumstance. "You're not going to believe what's just happened," they said. "One of our export coke shipments that was loaded several weeks earlier at Port Kembla is about to be placed under British Royal Navy escort." Now, coke's a raw material used in the iron and steelmaking process. Now, this naval escort didn't occur in some global maritime hotspot. This was in the UK waters as the ship approached the port city of Hull in England. The broader context was the owners of British Steel had stopped purchasing raw materials for the blast furnaces at the Scunthorpe Steelworks, and there was a considerable risk of irreversible damage to the furnaces if they ran out of coke. There was also a concern that the coke shipment from BlueScope would be redirected. The UK government passed emergency legislation to take control of British Steel and deploy the Navy to ensure the critically needed raw material arrived safely at the plant, allowing the blast furnace to continue to operate without damage. Now, coincidentally, at the time we were providing critical supplies of coke to British Steel, we were also providing urgent supplies of coke to the Vassella Steelworks in South Australia. The backdrop to this situation is the terrible decline in the UK steel industry. Since the 1970s, UK steel production has fallen from 30 million tonnes per annum to just 3 million tonnes today. The UK was the 5th largest steel producer in the world. It's now ranked 26. A combination of high energy costs and environmental regulations have increased operating costs. UK power prices are 25% higher than the EU, crippling their competitive position. Massive overcapacity from China, trade restrictions, geopolitical tensions have distorted markets. And of the 6 steel companies still operating in the UK today, 4 of them are in administration or on a government assistance package. So that's a real-life story. Sadly, the situation at Vassella is equally as bleak, and BlueScope is leading an international consortium of steelmakers to ascertain if reindustrialisation of the region is possible. Ladies and gentlemen, Australian manufacturing is at a dangerous crossroad. If industry and government are smart enough to navigate these conditions, our manufacturing sector will remain viable and the federal government's future made in Australia economic policy can be a reality. If we can't, we face a decline in manufacturing, similar to that which we've seen in the UK steel industry. The looming risk to manufacturing is the result of long-standing dysfunction in the domestic gas market and the lack of a fair gas price for Australian customers. So today, on behalf of all 12 members of Manufacturing Australia, I'm proud to officially launch Manufacturing Australia's campaign for fair gas prices. Now, in one sense, this campaign shouldn't be necessary, but unfortunately, manufacturing's been at the wrong end of 15 years of failed gas policies. We're calling on political and industry leaders to recognise the economic benefit that flows from our sovereign manufacturing capability and the potential to grow it if we have access to fairly priced gas and allow our manufacturers to compete internationally. Currently, manufacturers in the eastern states, New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia and Tasmania, face gas prices more than 3 times those of our main LNG competitors, the United States and Qatar. Despite massive gas reserves in Australia, one of the highest wholesale prices is here amongst producer nations. In 2024, Australian industry paid an average wholesale price of around $10.30 per gigajoule of gas. This compares to our LNG rivals, Qatar and the United States, at $2.20 and $3 per gigajoule respectively. Worse, the adoption of a pricing mechanism that is based on LNG export prices means that local gas users are effectively paying for export infrastructure they don't use. That's not right. It increases local gas prices and puts local gas users at a structural disadvantage. So just pause and think about that. Australian gas users are effectively subsidising the cost of gas going to countries we compete with as manufacturers. It's not unreasonable. In fact, it's our responsibility to challenge this and ask why. Why are we letting the unforeseen consequences of energy policy decisions made 15 years ago still distort today's more brittle and exposed domestic economy? So what's gone wrong? Let's get some facts on the table. While some conventional gas sources have lower production costs than the east coast of Australia, high domestic gas prices are caused by 4 key factors that have distorted the market and the demand and supply balance. Firstly, the massive increase in demand by LNG exporters to supply overseas customers that's come online in the past 10 years. Second, a declining output in East Coast gas fields, especially the Bass Strait, which has underpinned East Coast gas supplies for 60 years. Third, an unwillingness by state governments, particularly Victoria and New South Wales, to enable new gas field developments. This reduces the amount of gas that's available and makes development more costly. Just think of the difficulties of the Narrabri gas project. This behaviour is particularly egregious when those same governments want industry to decarbonise. They must understand that gas is fundamental to the decarbonisation journey. And fourth, a deliberately opaque market in which most gas is traded via confidential bilateral contracts, and LNG-based gas sellers have dominant negotiating power over local gas buyers. We now have the bizarre situation in the Eastern Australian market, where over the past decade, domestic gas demand has fallen by over 20%. Volumes have increased massively, and yet gas prices have more than doubled. Worse, the Australian Energy Market Operator is forecasting shortages of up to 10% between 2029 and 2032, with this shortfall in gas increasing to 20 to 30% from 2033. That's less than 8 years away. And the forecast shortages only get larger as we move further into the 2030s. Unlike other commodities, gas touches every sector. It's a cost of living issue, a manufacturing issue, and a national energy security issue. Our jobs, our industries, and our energy independence all rely on it. No other commodity comes close. In terms of manufacturing, gas is critical for a wide range of industries. Industries that are represented here today by Manufacturing Australia, including your locally manufactured Ream hot water system, which is ironically a renewable energy store and made from Australian steel. Aluminium produced at Tomago in Newcastle and extruded into doors and windows by Capral with raw materials from Alcoa. Cement, that is the basis for construction and infrastructure, from Cement Australia. Fertiliser for our critical agricultural industry, produced by Dyno Nobel. Paints, adhesives and fillers manufactured in some of the most advanced facilities in the world by Dulux. Wine bottles for our very important wine industry, made by Aurora. Scrap metal that's recycled as part of the circular economy by Sims. The bricks and pavers for your home, produced by Brickworks. Gyprock for your walls from CSR. And finally, and unashamedly, BlueScope's TrueCore steel framing and beautiful ColourBond roofing for your most important asset, the family home. Gas is essential for the manufacture and production of these products. Gas, unlike electricity, can be used to generate high temperature process heat that's central to these manufacturing processes. Gas generation, with its ability to provide dispatchable 24/7 power, is also crucial for the energy transition, along with other firming technologies such as batteries and pumped hydro. No modern economy can run without gas. Australia is chasing hard to meet its Paris Accord 2050 net zero targets, and our coal-fired generators are closing, while the level of renewable energy increases. A key role for gas is to provide firming power, that is, the electricity which can be there 24/7, not just when the wind blows or the sun shines, and demand for this will only increase. Put simply, having gas in the grid allows us to build more renewables faster. Without gas, the energy transition will be delayed and net zero targets become more difficult to achieve. South Australian Premier Malinauskas made this science, not socials point in determining our energy policy recently. With his state at 80% renewable penetration, he said, "Without gas, there's no firming of our electricity system. And without firming, there are no renewables." If we can't get gas prices down, electricity prices will also be higher, because gas generation often sets the marginal electricity price in the national electricity market. These are all issues governments are now grappling with. Letting the lights go out is not an option for an advanced and developed economy like Australia. Whether it's appreciated or not, gas must be part of the energy transition story. We must stop demonising gas and ensure Australia Gas is used in the nation's best interests. When gas comes into its own, its ability to effect major reductions in CO2 emissions for existing industrial processes. Consider my own company. BlueScope's Port Kembla blast furnace makes 3 million tonnes of steel per annum. This steel goes directly into major infrastructure and Australia's building and construction industry, which employs around 1 million skilled workers and provides housing for hundreds of thousands of families each year. At Port Kembla, switching from the coal-fired blast furnace to gas-based direct reduced iron, or DRI, could lead to a 60% reduction in emissions, or 3.6 million tonnes of CO2 annually. By any measure, that's a material reduction in CO2 emissions for Australia. But to achieve this, BlueScope would need around 40 petajoules of additional gas annually. This represents about 8% of the current East Coast annual demand of approximately 500 petajoules. There are other enablers required to make such a transition at Port Kembla, but right now it just won't happen because the gas supply is not available and the gas price is unaffordable. Back to Vassella in South Australia, where the steelworks is currently in administration. BlueScope is leading a consortium of some of the world's most innovative steelmakers. Korea's POSCO, Nippon Steel Corporation from Japan, and JSW Steel Limited from India. Together we're evaluating whether it's feasible to establish a new direct reduced iron plant, which we see as the most viable way to create a long-term sustainable operation and grow a new low-emissions iron export industry. Establishing such an industry is clearly in the national interest, but the highest hurdle will be access to adequate supply of affordable gas. And this is in a state with ample supplies in the Moomba gas fields. In short, the demand for gas is only set to grow, and so are the benefits it can bring to our economy and our environment. However, as we move forward, we need to face the reality that new, reliable sources of supply are urgently needed if we're to achieve our goals and not witness the deindustrialisation of our economy. Addressing this won't be easy. Government is having to fix a policy failure that's been allowed to exist for years. Vested interests in the global energy companies will resist change to the policy settings that should have been established from the start. So this makes it hard, but it's not impossible nor worth pursuing. In fact, the opposite. It's essential for our shared Made in Australia and decarbonisation goals. And it should not be beyond the intelligent people in government to design viable policies that work. Now, there's always a tendency for people to focus on someone or something else to blame. Some have accused the LNG industry of being the cause of what's happened, and that's not entirely fair. The global LNG companies have invested more than $60 billion in new facilities on the Australian east coast. In the process, they've created a major new industry for Australia and thousands of jobs. We all welcome that. They did this based on the policy settings put in place by governments at the time. But the combined impact of increased LNG export demand, with tightening domestic supply, inadequate investment, plus a highly imperfect and non-transparent market, means the new LNG industry operates at the expense of long-established domestic customers like BlueScope and other critical Australian manufacturers. Rather than blaming the LNG sector or past governments, we're focused on solutions. A starting point is to understand how Australia allowed itself into this situation. Specifically, how did we become one of the world's largest exporters of LNG, providing the energy that our trading partners need, while effectively starving domestic industry of a key input, competitively priced gas that supports manufacturing? Armed with this understanding, we can begin to fix the deficiencies and the inequity of the current system and put in place solutions both immediately and in the long term so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Part of the answer, I'd argue, lies in the policy settings that were put in place. Put simply, on the East Coast, we're an international policy outlier. Compared to other major gas producers, whether it's the US, Canada, and even Western Australia, the East Coast Australian market stands out. It doesn't have a domestic gas reservation scheme in place, nor is there any form of export permitting. Addressing these two issues would go part way to fixing the problem. Now, to be really clear, no one is calling for contracts to be torn up, and the energy companies should desist from that deliberate line of obfuscation about sovereign risk. We understand the implications and importance of our reputation as a trading partner. Similarly, we should ignore the self-serving objections of overseas energy companies. The members of Manufacturing Australia and the thousands of their downstream customer businesses are calling for reservation for a proportion of newly contracted and recontracted gas, and immediate reservation for all uncontracted gas. Immediate reservation of uncontracted gas would bring rapid relief for East Coast manufacturing businesses. In the medium term, if Australia reserved just 1/3 of its current East Coast gas production, It would be sufficient to meet expected residential and commercial demand, industrial decarbonisation needs, and gas peaking generation to help firm renewables. This would still allow 2/3 of East Coast gas production to be exported to meet contracts that support Australia's trading partners. What's also urgent and needs immediate focus, we need to bring on new gas supplies, particularly as current sources of supply diminish. Victoria and New South Wales need to start supporting new gas developments, whether it's Gippsland or Narrabri, again, as South Australian Premier Malinaskis called for recently. Beetaloo in the Northern Territory needs to be developed. Queensland should continue unlocking new gas fields. And the federal government needs to speed up regulatory approvals and support investment in gas pipelines and storage to get the gas where it's needed, when it's needed most. This is akin to building or upgrading our national highway network. Once new gas fields open and Australia's gas production increases further, the proportional domestic allocation would naturally be lower. And speeding approvals would lower the overall cost of new developments. A win-win if ever there was one. The federal government should also strengthen the Australian domestic gas security mechanism by enforcing the net contributor test for LNG projects. This is where LNG operators need to show they are making a net contribution to gas supplies, something they haven't done. Now to deal with the thornier issue. More than just accessing gas, we need it at prices that will allow our products to compete internationally. In our view, the additions to supply that would occur from redirecting uncontracted gas will not be enough to lower gas prices in the short to medium term to levels that would be viable for domestic manufacturers. New supplies and reservation as contracts expire will help, but they'll take time to come on stream. And unfortunately, that's time we don't have. Our analysis, confirmed by external experts, indicates that it should be possible to deliver gas to East Coast customers at well below $10 per gigajoule and still achieve reasonable returns on investment for gas companies based on their production costs. To deliver this outcome, there are several potential policy levers government could use. One option would be for the government to act as a group buyer of gas and then resell this gas to domestic users. With government effectively managing a book build, this would help to correct the current imbalance in bargaining power between gas sellers and buyers. Another option would be for government to place a small levy on LNG exports and recycle the revenue generated to reduce the cost of gas for domestic consumers. This approach could be applied on an equal basis or varied to achieve policy objectives. Now, these are without question major changes to current East Coast gas policy settings, but they're hardly revolutionary. If government was starting from scratch to design a gas policy today, international experience suggests a price mechanism would be part of that policy. For example, the United States has an export permit system that provides a public interest test should exports leave the domestic market short or prices too high. The EU imposed a gas price cap in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine to reduce gas prices and volatility. Qatar and Malaysia have volume reservation and dual pricing systems with discounted pricing for domestic users. And India and Indonesia have price caps. The difficulty is that the government's not starting from scratch, but just because it's harder to do now doesn't mean that it's good policy. Major change is required to fix our broken gas market and reinstate a fair domestic price. Again, compared to other international exporting countries, we are a policy outlier. Now, unless these decisions are taken, then the country runs the very real risk of seeing what's left of our manufacturing industry shut down. We need to reflect on what that means. As COVID showed us, there are some industries where we need to maintain a sovereign capability. Put another way, there are some industries where their value is far greater than just their output. We could call these strategic industries, those which are essential for any functioning economy. Steel, aluminium, cement, bricks, fertiliser, critical minerals, petrochemicals, food, fibre and packaging are among these. Without them, Australia runs the very real risk of being dependent on supply chains that could be under threat at any time. We know the consequences of failed energy policy on domestic manufacturing. Think Germany and other parts of the EU that are grappling with the consequences of energy policy decisions made over the last decade and a willingness to tie themselves to Russia. They're now in the midst of a major deindustrialisation, and the economic and social consequences are only just starting to be felt. I'm pretty sure no one here today wants to choose that. An important question is, what sort of future economy do we want to have? The recently returned federal government has made it clear our future needs to include a vibrant manufacturing sector. And Australia has what's required to fulfil that ambition. We lead the world when it comes to almost every commodity and resource. We shouldn't be embarrassed by this. In fact, we need to leverage it. After all, it's what's underpinned our amazing standard of living. But we can't be complacent. While the rest of the world will keep demanding our commodities, other suppliers are emerging, especially in Latin America and Africa. That's why we need to be thinking ahead. What can we do to meet demand for manufactured products where their inputs are the raw materials which we have in abundance? Products like low emissions iron that use our critical iron ore resource and gas. This is the opportunity the government is trying to address with a future made in Australia. But today, our current manufacturing industry is under threat from a restricted supply of affordable gas. This is a problem, but one that can be resolved with sound policy underpinned by clear, longer-term thinking. It's an opportunity for us to set up our industrial future. Governments have done this before, lent into major structural reform for the greater good of the economy and the country. Paul Farrow, the National Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union, said of Treasurer Jim Chalmers' recent productivity roundtable, "There won't be a reform put on the roundtable that would create a bigger or faster boost to productivity than an East Coast gas reservation system. Decoupling our East Coast gas market from our exports is key to restoring the sustainable gas prices we lost a decade ago." The manufacturing companies represented here today have been operating and innovating in Australia and beyond for decades, some for more than 100 years. We employ more than 100,000 people directly and indirectly, operate in 30 countries and export to more than 50. It's an incredible level of achievement and resilience. And as manufacturers, we've survived and done that by focusing on the bottom line. Well, the bottom line is a future made in Australia depends on affordable gas being available for Australian industry. No gas, no future made in Australia. That's why I'd invite you and encourage you to support Manufacturing Australia's campaign to deliver fair gas prices for all Australians. So thank you for your time today, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to begin with two words you're probably sick of hearing when it comes to gas prices. Bear with me. Sovereign risk. The way you outline it there, to really simplify it, is it that when we might be dealing with these companies and countries, the message would be you're going to go from getting the deal of a lifetime to still a very good deal, and that's what should be manageable about sovereign risk? Is that a simplified version of why you think this would be something we could pull off as a country?
Yeah, I think we need to be really careful with the term sovereign risk, or those two words, and I think it gets used for reasons to justify an argument, of course. But the first thing I'd say is many LNG producers operate in countries that just naturally have a much greater sovereign risk than Australia does. We have a fabulous economy, law, principles, values. So we're naturally lower sovereign risk right from the get-go. What also concerns us is people talk about redirecting supply and the damage that would do to our trading partners. And as I said, that is not, from our perspective, something that we think is appropriate. But there's enough uncontracted gas to be redirected that we think could occur, make a change for the Australian economy and not create any sovereign risk. The other point I'd make is that right now we're facing into a serious sovereign risk when it comes to our manufacturing capacity. We are potentially going to lose that and deindustrialise, and there's a serious sovereign risk that comes with that.
So comparing the sovereign risk of our reputation, if you like, with the actuality of can we make steel, can we process critical minerals, which
Correct.
is sort of the next one, and you'd say, well, there's sovereign risk on both sides, and one's being spoken about as taboo and the other one is, let's hope we can fix it.
Yeah, look, part of the dilemma here is because the government's starting not at the start of this process, there is no zero cost option, and a cost is going to be incurred by someone. Our proposition is that the cost of deindustrialisation far outweighs the cost of gas reservation and a price mechanism for a portion of our gas to support manufacturing in Australia.
Is simplicity your friend here? I just think of some of the terms in my time in Canberra. There's been triggers. I think both sides were wielding a big stick at different times as to whether or not they used it. Mandatory price coding. Even your suggestion of various elements, maybe a charge for exporting that comes back. Is the simpler the better here? Because otherwise there's confusion, there's delays, then when do things start? Do we need simplicity?
We do need simplicity and we need speed. So I think there's a longer term design that potentially helps the system, and to be fair, gas producers themselves are now talking about reservation from new fields. But we have an immediate problem that we need to solve, and all of that policy, that set work, that framework, that intervention that you've talked about, from my perspective, I see not enough gas and it's unaffordable. So what we've got to date hasn't worked, which is why we're calling for something new, but something immediate.
And would one of the fairest ways to approach this, Gladstone is often seen as sort of ground zero for when a lot of the problems began. Santos as a company uses the most uncontracted gas. Now, when it first was talking about its export plans, it was going to use the gas there, and it's never produced enough gas. Should it be told, go and get the gas because you're not getting it anymore from the uncontracted market? Would that actually help alleviate most of the issues?
Look, on the supply side, again, uncontracted gas should be redirected to the East Coast gas market, and we do not believe that domestic gas should be purchased to satisfy export contracts. That was never the intention when this industry was first set up, and again, recognise the massive contribution this industry's made. $60 billion of investment, I mean, a fabulous outcome for the country. But we now find ourselves in the perverse situation where export customers are being advantaged against domestic manufacturing. So uncontracted gas redirected to the East Coast market, and there should not be domestic gas purchased for export contracts.
And when it comes back to that sovereign risk element, if that's enforced, including on Santos, wouldn't that just be us codifying what they said would happen?
Well, that was the intention, and the commentary at the time. And look, again, this is not us pointing at any one company or any one government. Unfortunately, this has been a problem that's been emerging for 10 or more years. And there's been opportunities even during that period to correct it, which governments haven't taken. My concern is that we're at that crossroad, and I'm seeing industries close. I see the pressure that we incur inside our business with energy costs increasing. And equally, I see from a sovereign risk perspective, the alternatives that we have as a company in terms of where we allocate our capital. And it becomes increasingly difficult to allocate your capital to a country that's at a cost disadvantage.
Word association for you, green steel?
Not sure it exists.
Could it?
Green steel's Green steel is a very interesting prospect.
Is it greener steel?
Greener steel, thank you. That's much better informed. Yeah, the short answer is there's probably no such thing as green steel, but there is greener steel. And one of the things BlueScope has been working very hard on is how we continue to decarbonise the blast furnace process. And that's that opportunity that I touched on, potentially to be able to reduce 60% of our emissions, or 3.6 million tonnes. I did some rough Google checking. I think Australia emits about 440 million tonnes of carbon a year across the nation. We could take 3.6 million tonnes of emissions out by changing our process when it's ready and if there is enough affordable gas. So there is certainly an opportunity for us to continue to decarbonise the process, and an opportunity also, particularly around that fabulous iron ore resource that we have, to develop products that will help other blast furnaces around the world decarbonise their processes as well.
And is that the medium to long-term opportunity, that if we're able to produce steel and other things with more green energy and countries get more serious, especially the big ones, about decarbonising, then we're at a natural advantage with the land we have and where some of these things can be located, not in the cities, but out where it's easier to put bigger renewable projects without, obviously, upsetting ag and so on?
Yeah, look, I think so. I don't want to sound disrespectful to the critical minerals industry, but my view on this is the most critical mineral we have in Australia is iron ore. It's funding the balance sheet, it's globally scaled, and we're currently working with a consortium of BHP, Rio Tinto, Mitsui and Woodside on a new technology that potentially allows us to produce an iron ore product that is a lower emissions product that could then be used in blast furnaces around the world. I mean, the short answer, unfortunately, is blast furnaces are going to be around for another 30 or 40 years. There's just not enough scrap in the world to produce the amount of steel we need from electric arc furnaces. So anything that we can do, building on that amazing global scale industry we have called iron ore, to further enhance the product and decarbonise the blast furnace processes globally, I think is a fabulous Team Australia opportunity.
So that, I'm not sure what you can give away. Plenty, I'm sure. What's the trick on that lower emissions version? What's the key? Is it around energy use or processes and technology?
It's process, but of course, to your point, where that incredible iron ore resource is in the Pilbara, a great opportunity from a renewable energy perspective to power the process that would produce the lower emissions product.
Okay, I might go to some questions from the floor. The first one is Matthew Cranston from The Australian.
Thanks, Tom. I think you're being a bit generous with us today. Give me one or two questions, is that right?
Yeah, you can have a couple.
So just on the more breaking news at the moment, the government's just announced $600 million for smelter in Mount Isa. If a company like Glencore can't really sort of make that work, why should taxpayers foot the bill for that? So if I can just ask you that, and then a couple on the gas.
Matthew, thank you. Look, I don't know the details of that specific company or circumstance, but what I would say to you, and part of
maybe in light of your experience at Vassella as well.
Part of the dilemma we face in Australia, and in our instance at BlueScope, we see it with the amount of exported volume that's coming out of a country like China. The amazing asset we have at Port Kembla, we make 3 million tonnes of steel a year. China's currently exporting 10 million tonnes of steel a month. So 120 million tonnes of steel a year versus our 3 million tonnes of steel. So part of the dilemma is markets have been distorted in some of these areas, and then you run the risk of industry appearing to be uneconomic, or why are we putting taxpayer money into something, quite frankly, that might be one of those strategic industries that I talked about. So you need to be able, I think, look through potential market distortions to make sure that, of course, taxpayer money is being used appropriately. But I think just the naive, if I could be bold, view that let the market decide, I think that's a slippery slope that I wouldn't want to see us on.
Thank you. And just on the gas, so you mentioned the parameters you need for the conversion to the furnace in Kembla. Do you have any price on the cost, or on what gas needs to be for that to happen? And is there a price on the gas also for anything you might like to do in that regard in Wyalla as well? And I might as well just ask the other question in relation to the reservation on uncontracted gas. Going to the gas producers, they might fire back at you on that and say, well, look, you know, if you have to contract all that gas up in a reservation, it crimps their ability to sell at the best price, and therefore also the ACCC has found this, that they are less likely to go and invest in wells for those who don't have the price guarantees.
Thanks, Matthew. A couple of things. West Australia's had a gas reservation system since 2006. In that period, until quite recently, quite stable and reasonably attractive gas prices, $6 a gigajoule. In that time, we've seen massive investment in Western Australia and gas production has tripled. So I'm not sure I buy the argument that a reservation system means no one's going to invest. I'm very sympathetic to investment criteria being set clearly before you go in to a project. So certainty is critical in terms of these large capital projects. So knowing early what a reservation system might look like, I think is very important. We've talked about gas at below $10 a gigajoule, which we believe for the majority of gas fields would still allow the gas producers to make more than adequate returns, including a return on capital. So that's the number that we've called out that we believe is appropriate for East Coast gas.
And that's what you'd need for that conversion
Correct.
to happen?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, man.
How much of that is wellhead price in WA though? So if you can say, well, gas is cheap here, but some gas to produce will cost $2 and some will be much higher than that. So
Correct.
how much of that is wellhead price?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's clearly one of the issues. And I'm sure there's projects that have been approved recently where gas costs are much higher than potentially a $10 a gigajoule gas would support. And I'm sympathetic to that. But again, I come back to the counterfactual of there's a no zero cost option here. There's going to be a cost incurred by someone. Our argument is the cost of deindustrialisation far outweighs any cost that would be incurred through a reservation system or a price mechanism.
What about household use? I mean, you've spoken about the critical element of what you see as industrial use. If it's too hard to do at that scale, would you say household use might be a little bit higher and if needs be?
Oh, look, I think a reservation
Prices
system,
of it, I should say, yeah.
I think a reservation system for the East Coast will have an impact not only on industrial users but commercial users and through power with the peaking capability of gas.
So essentially you wouldn't try to separate it in any way, whatever it would be would affect both elements equally.
I'm not here to design government policy, obviously.
Had a few ideas.
But clearly that would give governments the option to think about what policy objectives they wanted to pursue.
And given we're talking in the realities of governments and votes, you'd expect they'd have to give households a decent run as well?
I'm not here to design government policy.
Let's go to Ryan Kropp from the AFR.
Thanks. Just follow on from Matthew's question. I'll pin you again on Mount Isa. But you've said that it's hard to tell the line between when a business is kind of uncompetitive, based on international distortions, right? But at what point do you stop subsidising a business? If an industry has been considered strategic, should it be subsidised forever? Where is the line? And should some businesses eventually be let go?
Oh, I think, of course, right? I just saw a quick grab of Minister Ayres as I was walking down here, and it seems as though, and I'll stand corrected here, but it seems as though the support is contingent upon continued investment from Glencore and a range of hurdles and KPIs. That to me says that Glencore thinks there's a future for the business. If it was just a grant and walk away, that's a different scenario. But that to me says that the owners of the facility believe there's a future. So I suspect if that's the case, we're not at that point yet in Mount Isa.
Yeah. So do you think it should be contingent on essentially future-proofing that business by the company itself and not just governments?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I've got some of our colleagues from Port Kembla here who do all the real work at BlueScope. I'm sorry, I nearly said BHP, at BlueScope. And they're incredible. We also run the biggest furnace in the country. So we understand the complexities and the pressures of running big industrial facilities, and you do have to future-proof your business. We've worked hard in Australia to increase our focus on value-added products like ColourBond. We've diversified as a company and grown our business in North America to reduce the risk. So you do have to future-proof the business.
So, and just on future-proofing, you've said that gas is, or you've suggested that gas is a kind of transitional fuel. That implies that at some point you'll be off it. Do you have any long-term plans to get off gas? And what is feasible? What is your plan by 2050? And I mean, to get gas at the price you want it, that's going to require some level of government intervention. Should investment by BlueScope in these kind of emissions reductions technologies be a condition of that government intervention in the gas market?
We've had a climate action report published since 2019, set an aspiration of net zero by 2050, outlined the enablers that would require us to get there: technology, renewable energies at the appropriate cost, public policy. So this is not a simple journey. This is not a matter of making a choice from one technology to the other. We are, by definition, a hard-to-abate industry. So that takes time, and we require transition fuels like gas to allow us to make that transition. It's not a choice of one technology versus another.
And what about a commitment to investing in emissions reduction technologies as a kind of quid pro quo for lower gas prices?
Well, that's what we're doing right now. I mean, I think it makes all the sense in the world for all of us to continue to work on improving our footprint, making sure that we've got a sustainable business. Part of being a sustainable business goes to our emissions. So from our perspective, really clear plans, great progress, I must say, against absolute abatement, which is really the target here. But you have to have a sustainable business model or you don't exist.
Thanks.
When you're talking about these critical industries, if your gas plan was adopted, I know you're not here for policy, but let's say they pick it up anyway, would the need for those sort of subsidies, underwriting and so on disappear in your view, or is it a constant watch with other factors when it comes to steel and other areas like that?
Well, I mean, it's a constant watch. And again, if I can really only talk in detail about BlueScope, we're dealing with massive oversupply out of China, a whole range of geopolitical issues and trade tensions with what's going on in North America. So there's always something that you're dealing with. But right now, a critical issue for Australian manufacturing is the affordability of gas and the availability of gas. And that's really what we're here calling out today.
All right, Andrew Probyn.
Mr. Vassella, Andrew Probyn from the Nine Network. It's quite clear from what you've said today that, as you see it, gas reservation policy is going to be key. And for viewers out there and people who might not know, gas reservation policy in WA was somewhat contentious for a long time, that it was bipartisan policy in WA to support gas reservation. That is, both Labor and the Liberals supported it. But it was bipartisan in opposition over on the East Coast. That is, Labor and Liberal parties were staunchly opposed to it. Now they seem to have switched. So as you were saying, gas is about $6 a gigajoule at the moment. Is that right, in WA? And it's about in the mid-teens in the East Coast. So if you were to apply a 15% gas reservation policy for East Coast gas, what price do you want to get down to? Because you've talked about it being under 10, but should it be 6 as it is in WA?
Oh, look, Andrew, what we've said is we think a gas price less than $10 a gigajoule is an appropriate level, recognising production costs where we are. I mean, $6 a gigajoule, I use that number as what we've seen in WA over the past. In more recent times, as supplies have become more challenged, prices have started to increase. But we still believe a price below $10 is feasible for the gas producers and would allow manufacturing in Australia to deal with that as a viable cost.
So if you've got an exporter who can sell their product for, say, $15 a gigajoule, and you are, for argument's sake, trying to get it down to 6, right? So there's a difference of about 9. Who pays that difference? Is it just that they've got to cop it for 15% of what they produce, or is it going to be the government that pays the difference?
Andrew, I don't have the specific answer to that, but what I've said and what is really clear, again, is there's no zero cost option here. The cost option that we're balancing is, I think, the cost of deindustrialising in our country, losing our manufacturing base is way more than $5, $6, $7 a gigajoule for gas.
But you can't expect taxpayers to pay the difference, can you? So it's going to be the exporters who are creaming it when it comes to our resources, that they would have to pay for it, wouldn't they?
Well, we still believe at less than $10, there's an attractive return available for producers.
Okay, let's call it 8. You said before also, and I kind of missed the point. Maybe you could explain. You're saying that domestic customers effectively are subsidising international exports, or something similar to that in your speech. Can you explain how the thinking there?
Well, the netback pricing obviously includes all of the infrastructure that's been built for exports, which, of course, domestic users aren't using. So the point is that builds in a structural cost disadvantage for domestic producers. Domestic consumers, I'm sorry.
And so what's that cost? Have you substantiated a rough number?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've done a lot of work around this. We didn't go into the East Coast Gas Review without putting quite a lot of effort into this. We've had external experts work with us on what we think the cost curve is, the availability of gas, and that's all part of the submission that we've put to the government.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Andrew.
So, perhaps without specifying governments or ministers, because you probably won't, but when you have gone to this approach in private meetings over the years, what are you usually told? Is it it's too hard, it's sovereign risk, we've got another plan? What's the sort of response you usually get?
Oh, look, it is hard. I acknowledge that. It's hard. We're starting at a point in the curve where it would have been much easier to start when the LNG gas industry was first set up. So it's difficult, and there's a cost that's involved, and as Andrew's pointed out, not always bipartisan support. I wish there would be bipartisan support for East Coast Gas Reservation. So yes, there's challenges. This is not easy, but you know, we've been really encouraged by the federal government's focus on a future made in Australia. We wholeheartedly endorse that. We're supporting that with our own chequebook, relining a blast furnace in Port Kembla for $1 billion, building new capacity for coating and painting in this country. So supporting manufacturing in Australia. But it is difficult. This is going to require an intervention, and it's going to require structural change to the existing market conditions.
And I don't know what international symposium or meetings manufacturers have, but there seems to be broad agreement from a lot of people here we're getting stitched up on our own gas. Is that the perception overseas? Do they chuckle privately and go, geez, you guys haven't done that too well?
Well, there is an irony in a country like Australia with such incredible resource finding itself in a position where we don't believe gas is at sustainable pricing levels. There's certainly an irony about that. My fear more is that it becomes an investment decision, and the flight of capital is instantaneous, and for companies like ours, where we have the choice to invest in Australia or North America, that becomes a challenge in terms of justifying domestic investment.
So another sovereign risk, because those same companies might be preferring to invest in their country where they're getting our cheap gas possibly.
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity that I talked about for a green iron or a decarbonised iron product, I mean, right now what's emerging are hubs in places like the Middle East, where gas is at very, very low cost. Yep. And we're seeing that industry emerge there. I think there's an opportunity for Australia to grab, but we can't be complacent.
Okay. One more from Ryan Crop.
Sorry, I'll go again. Your steelworks in Port Kembla is adjacent to the only currently built gas import terminal in Australia. Are you open to buying gas, imported gas, if it's at the right price? And just a cheeky one, if I may, do you have a view on nuclear energy in Australia?
Let me start with the second one first. No. But
Might free up some gas.
our steel mill in North America produces 3 million tonnes of steel. It's an electric arc furnace actually powered by a grid that's supplied by nuclear energy. So we're as close to green steel at North Star BlueScope in North America as any steel company in the world, I would hazard a guess. So there's obviously some issues around that.
So you can't do green steel without nuclear?
I'm sorry?
Can't do green steel without nuclear?
Well, it certainly lowers the emissions, there's no question. And I'm sorry, the first part of your question again?
Gas imports.
Gas imports, yes. Look, pretty simple economics. Taking gas out of the ground in Australia, processing it, putting it on a ship, sending it offshore, and then bringing it back, processing it again, selling it to domestic consumers. I just don't know how the economics work. My fear is that if we get to the point where we're buying gas from import terminals, we've lost, waved the white flag, and there's a shortage of gas is really what that's akin to. So I just can't get my head around the fact that we live in a country with massive gas reserves and we need to rely on importing it to feed our industry. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Thanks.
Well, we appreciate your time. You're welcome back via this membership. We can compare energy bills. Yours is a bit high, but ours is pretty high as well. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Mark Vassella.